8 years is a long time to do the same thing every night. Most people cycle out of contract work after 2, maybe 3 years. Somebody offers them a day shift somewhere, or they move, or they just get tired of the drive. I never got tired of the drive. That's probably the thing that kept me there. The complex sits about 35 miles north of Barstow on a 2-lane called Fort Irwin Road. Nothing out there but creosote and the occasional coyote and these massive white dishes tilted at the sky. Coming in each night, I'd pass the same 3 billboards: a personal injury lawyer, a casino near Needles, and one for a motel in Baker that I'm pretty sure closed in 2009. The motel billboard was still up when I left. Some things just don't come down. I worked for a company called Western Facility Solutions. The contract was with JPL, but the site was Goldstone, the Deep Space Communications Complex officially. Most nights I didn't think about what the place actually did. I knew the dishes tracked spacecraft. I knew some of them had been doing it since the 60s, and I knew I was not the kind of person who was supposed to understand any of that. My job was the bathrooms, the floors, the HVAC units, the exterior lighting on 3 of the maintenance buildings, and a rolling checklist of mechanical stuff that engineers generated and then forgot about. I kept things running so other people could focus on whatever they actually cared about. That's the job. I liked it fine. I'm not being sarcastic. The nights were quiet. The drive was clear at that hour, and nobody talked to me much. I had a thermos of coffee I made at home, Folgers whatever was on sale, and a truck that was paid off. And I had a kid in community college I was paying for. That was enough. John was doing general ed at Victor Valley College in Victorville. He wanted to transfer to Cal State San Bernardino eventually. He'd told me that 4 or 5 times like I might forget. I wasn't going to forget. His tuition plus books was the reason I was on nights instead of days, because nights paid $1.50 more per hour, and that added up over a year. He didn't know that part. I didn't tell him. So, 8 years. Same gate, same badge swipe, same walk to the contractor office to pick up my checklist, same rounds in the same order. I had the complex broken into sections. Buildings 1 through 4 were the original operation structures, mostly administrative. 5 through 11 were the technical buildings, equipment rooms, relay stations. Annex A and Annex B were storage and utilities. Annex C was the old telemetry annex, built in the late 70s, last actively used for something in the early 90s. By the time I got to Goldstone, it was mostly dead space. A few racks of legacy hardware, some cable trays, a room they used for parts storage. Nobody worked in there. I walked through it twice a week to check the HVAC and make sure nothing was leaking. That was it. Just a building on my route. Adam Park worked wiring. He was on the same crew, different specialization. Where I did general facilities, he did electrical. Panel replacements, lighting ballasts, conduit work. We weren't close exactly, but we'd been passing each other in that contractor office for 6 years, and I knew him fine. He had this thing where he'd complain about whatever sports team he'd watched the night before, and you could set your watch by it. Easy guy to be around. He went into Annex C on a Tuesday to replace a ballast in the ceiling of one of the back rooms. That's a 20-minute job, tops. You turn off the breaker, pull the fixture, swap the ballast, put it back. I'd done it myself in other buildings. Nothing complicated. He was in there for about an hour before Meadow called it in. Meadow Bradley was the site medic. She had a little station near Building 4, and she was usually calm in a way that made other people calm too. That was her whole thing. So when she got on the radio and her voice had something different in it, not panic, but tight, I noticed. I was finishing up the men's room in Building 7 when the call came through. By the time I got over to Annex C, there were already 2 people standing outside the entrance, and Meadow was crouched down next to Adam just inside the main door. His face looked like he'd fallen onto something rough, scraped across both cheeks and his chin. Not deep, but raw. Friction burns, almost. He was breathing. His eyes were open. That was the part that stuck. His eyes were open, and he was looking up at the ceiling, or past the ceiling, really. His gaze was fixed somewhere above the drop tiles, and he wasn't blinking much. Meadow was talking to him in that clipped way she had, asking his name, asking him to squeeze her hand. He wasn't doing either. I asked her what happened, and she said she didn't know. She'd found him like that. She already had her radio out. The ambulance from Barstow came in about 40 minutes, which felt long but was probably normal for that part of the desert. They loaded him up. His eyes never stopped moving along whatever he was tracking up there. That was the last time I saw Adam standing. I heard later he was sedated at the hospital. I heard his wife came out from Hesperia. I heard a lot of things secondhand in that contractor office over the next couple days, and most of it didn't add up to an explanation. People said he'd probably had a medical episode. Seizure, maybe. Nobody mentioned what his face looked like. I went back to my rote. I kept cleaning. That was the week. Monica Wilson caught me before my shift on Thursday. She was standing outside the contractor office with her clipboard and a sealed envelope, which was unusual. Monica usually handed things off through the logbook or just sent an email. She wasn't the type to wait in a parking lot. She's my direct supervisor, has been for 3 years. She's organized in a way that feels almost aggressive. Every shift sheet in order, every maintenance request logged within the hour, every problem handled before it could turn into a problem. I'd always figured she was just that kind of person, good at the job. She handed me the envelope and said Adam's route was mine until further notice. Standard stuff, happened before when someone was out. Then she said the envelope had instructions for Annex C, room 19, and that I needed to follow them exactly. I asked what kind of instructions. She said, just follow them. I asked if there was something going on with the building. She said she couldn't get into it, and I should read the envelope before my shift started. I asked if it was related to what happened to Adam. She looked at me then, held it for a second. Then she said, "Read the envelope, Derek," and walked back inside. That was the whole conversation. I sat in my truck for a few minutes before I opened it. I don't know why. It was just a sealed envelope. But something about the way Monica had handed it to me made me want to think for a second before I did anything. She'd held onto it an extra moment when I reached for it. Like she almost didn't want to let go. The envelope had my name on it in black marker. Derek Green. Just that. Nothing else. Inside was a laminated card, which was its own thing. Who laminates something they're handing to someone once? And the card had 5 rules printed on it in a plain font. No header, no explanation of what they were for, or what building they applied to, or who'd written them. Just a numbered list. 1. Do not enter room 19 between 2:10 and 2:25 in the morning. 2. Do not unplug any speaker that turns on by itself. 3. Do not transmit on any device inside Annex C. 4. Do not look at the analog clock above the north door if it shows 2:16. 5. If you count more than 34 status lights in room 19, lock the exterior door and leave. I read them twice. Then I set the card on my passenger seat and looked out at the gate and the road and the dark desert past it. 5 rules. For a building full of old hardware and parts boxes. No speaker in that building had ever turned on while I was in there. I'd never seen an analog clock in there. I'd never counted status lights. I hadn't known there were status lights. I picked the card up and read them one more time. The laminate was smooth, and the edges were rounded, like someone had taken it to an office supply place and done it right. This wasn't something put together in a hurry. Somebody had thought about this. The coffee in my thermos was already getting cold. I put the card in my breast pocket, clipped my badge to my polo, and got out of the truck. Night 1, I checked the route twice. I wanted to know the building before anything else. That's just how I work. 8 years doing facilities, you learn that the first night in a new space is the only chance you get to actually look at things before they turn into background noise. After that, your eyes stop registering. Annex C had a specific shape to it. Long main hallway running east to west. Service rooms on the north side. Equipment rooms on the south. The bathrooms were near the west entrance. 2 single-occupancy units that looked like they'd been installed sometime in the 80s and hadn't been updated since. The mirror in the second one had a brown water spot in the upper right corner. The soap dispenser was one of those old push-down models with a pink soap reservoir you could see through the side. Empty. I refilled it from the jug on my cart. The air handler for the whole building was in a mechanical room about halfway down the hall. I checked the filters. Older but not due for swap yet. The belt looked okay. The unit ran quiet. I wrote okay on my sheet and moved on. Room 19 was at the east end. Door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stood in the frame. The room was bigger than I expected, 30 feet by 20, maybe a little longer. Metal rack equipment along 3 walls. The tall kind, floor to ceiling, bolted to the concrete. Old. Older than anything in the main buildings. All toggle switches and analog gauges and those status lights that run in vertical rows on the face of each rack. Some of the racks were still powered. The lights blinked slow and irregular. Green mostly, 1 amber, a few dark. I counted them without really planning to. 26. I wrote that down. There was a clock above the north door. Big, white-faced analog. Read secondhand. I looked at it before I remembered Rule 4, then looked away. 1:42. I kept my eyes on the equipment after that. Nothing happened. I pulled the door shut and finished the route. Night 2 was faster. I already knew which doors stuck. The mechanical room had a tight fit. You had to lift the handle slightly while you pushed. And I already knew which sections of hallway were dim enough to need the flashlight. I'd left a roll of blue painter's tape in my cart and put a small X on the wall at the start of each dim section. Monica probably would have told me to stop marking the walls, but nobody was watching me at 2 in the morning. Status lights in room 19, 27. I wrote it down. Third night, 28. The amber light had moved, or a different one had gone amber. I wasn't sure which. The mechanical room belt had developed a faint squeak, so I took 5 minutes to spray it and wrote it up on the maintenance log when I got back to the contractor office. No speakers turned on. No weirdness. Just a building full of old equipment running on low, making the small sounds old equipment makes. I started thinking the rules were historical. Something that had happened once, been addressed, and now the card was just there, out of habit. Places accumulate rules. Half the time nobody remembers why. That was wrong. The 4th night I got to Annex C at 1:50. I'd rushed the admin building because the HVAC unit there had been rattling and I wanted to track it down. Found it, a loose screw on the cover panel which had probably been rattling for weeks before anyone called it in. Made up the time on the next 2 buildings. So I was at Annex C early, which meant I was going to be in the hallway during the window. I did the bathrooms, the mechanical room. Belt was quiet after the spray, which was satisfying. I walked down the hallway toward room 19 and checked my watch at the mechanical room door. 2:14. I stopped, stood in the middle of the hallway with my cart behind me. Rule 1 said no entering room 19 between 2:10 and 2:25. I was in the hallway, not the room. I figured that was fine, so I stood there and waited. The hallway was dim in the usual spots. There was a water stain on one of the ceiling tiles directly above me that I'd noticed the first night, big and brown, spreading across about 1/3 of the tile. I looked at it. I looked at my watch. I looked at the closed door to room 19 at the end of the hall. At 2:16, the ceiling speaker came on. Not static first, not a hiss, just clean open air, and then a voice, thin, tired. The voice of a man who had been talking for a long time and was still talking anyway. This is Flight Specialist Lincoln Bridges, requesting downlink confirmation for Kepler-6 crew module. We are at mission elapsed time 34 years, 4 months, 14 days. Life support nominal, power reserves critical. Requesting response on standard frequency. I kept my hands in my pockets, didn't move. The voice paused and the open-air silence came back for maybe 20 seconds. Then, Goldstone, this is Kepler-6. I am aware the channel is active. Background noise profile indicates a receiver is online. Please confirm receipt of this transmission. My radio was on my belt. Rule 3 said, do not transmit on any device. My phone was in my pocket. No signal inside Annex C anyway. I didn't touch either one. The voice kept going. It said it had been in coast phase for 34 years. It said it was the last crew member still responding. It said the thermal buffer had failed 3 years back, and that life support margins were inside their final window. It used a lot of numbers I didn't know what to do with. Delta V figures, power draw percentages, something about a reaction control system running on reserve. Technical language that meant nothing to me. The shape of what it was saying was clear enough, though. A man describing being very far from Earth, running out of time, asking for someone to say something back. I know someone is there, it said. I've been tracking the background signal for 6 weeks. The antenna is receiving. Please respond. That part was the part that stayed with me. Not the 34 years, not the life support timer. The 6 weeks, the patience in it. The voice had been waiting, specifically waiting, and it had just said so. I stood in that hallway until 2:25. The voice came back 8 or 9 times in that window, calm every time, no panic in it, just the same request, stated different ways. On night 4, it was still general. Goldstone operator, receiving technician, whoever was there, not me by name, that came later. At 2:25, I walked to room 19 and counted from the doorway. 29 lights. I pulled the door shut and finished the route and left. I sat in my truck for a few minutes before I drove home. I had a Quaker Chewy bar on the dash, chocolate chip, and I ate it and looked at the gate. Kepler-6. 8 years at this site. I'd heard engineers talk about a lot of programs. Mars orbiters, Voyager, Cassini before it went down. Nothing called Kepler-6, nothing with a crew module. Goldstone didn't do crewed missions, not in my time there. 34 years back put the origin somewhere around 1991. The equipment in room 19, the building itself, it was all from that era. That didn't prove anything on its own. Old buildings keep old equipment. That's just deferred replacement. I drove home and went to bed. Didn't sleep great. Saturday I drove into Barstow. The San Bernardino County Library branch is on Mountain View Street, between a tire shop and a taqueria. I'd been there a few times before, mostly with John when he needed resources for school projects and didn't want to use the school library for reasons I never fully got to the bottom of. It opened at 10. I got there at 10:05. The reference librarian was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a coffee mug that said, "Libraries rock" in block letters. She pointed me to the research terminal without asking what I was looking for. I tried Kepler-6 first, got astronomy results. The Kepler telescope program, exoplanet designations, nothing useful. I added crew module, still nothing. Third try, Kepler-6 crewed flight, 1991. 1 result. A paper from the California Institute of Technology, published in 2003. Some kind of aerospace history review journal I'd never heard of. 6 pages, 25 cents a page. I printed the whole thing. I read it at one of the tables near the window. Dense. A lot of citations, a lot of technical language. The summary section was plain enough, though. In 1991, a private aerospace group had proposed a crewed deep space test flight under the designation Kepler-6, long-duration coast trajectory, designed to test life support systems at distances beyond lunar orbit. The proposal was submitted for FAA and DoD review and was rejected. Regulatory issues, the paper said. Funding collapse. Project listed as terminated in early 1992. A historical footnote. An interesting proposal that went nowhere. On page 3, in a section about the engineering team, I found a name. Lincoln Bridges. Flight Systems Engineer. Private Research Group Mojave. Primary designer of the crew module life support integration. Page 4 had a photograph. Small, black and white. The quality you get from scanning old print material. Grainy, but clear enough. A man in flight test coveralls. Dark hair parted neatly to one side. Sharp eyes, a badge clipped to his chest, too small to read. An angular face. Couldn't have been more than 30. The caption said Lincoln Bridges, 1991. There was a footnote below the paragraph. I flipped to the back page. Lincoln Bridges died in a hangar fire at Mojave Air and Spaceport in August of 1993. He was 31 years old. I sat there for a while. The library was quiet. Someone 2 tables over was reading a paperback. The kids section had some noise. A reading program, probably. Saturday morning stuff. I looked at the photograph again. I folded the pages along the crease and put them in my back pocket and walked out to the parking lot. The taqueria was already open. Carnitas smell coming across the lot. I got in my truck and sat there. Didn't start it right away. I drove home eventually, made eggs I didn't really taste, and slept until 4 in the afternoon, which is when my alarm goes off on work days. Got up, showered, clipped my badge to my chest, and drove out to Goldstone on the 15 North, then the 247 through the Mojave. Same route I'd done for 8 years. Same Joshua trees, same absolute nothing on either side of the road. I had the folded library pages in my jacket pocket. I left them there. The next few nights I got strict about the rules, like really strict. I'd always followed them. I'm not the kind of guy who ignores a laminated list. But there's a difference between following rules and following rules. I started running through all 5 before I even pulled on my gloves. Did it in the truck, in the parking lot before I badged through. Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 3, Rule 4, Rule 5. I said them out loud. That's me, the guy whispering to himself in a pickup truck at 11:45 p.m. in the Mojave Desert. Totally normal. I kept my radio volume low in Annex C, barely above 0. The hallways in that building were narrow and the acoustics were weird. Concrete block walls, drop ceilings, old HVAC that clicked and settled constantly, so I could still hear dispatch if they needed me. Mostly nobody needed me in Annex C. That was kind of the point of Adam's route. You went in, you did the mechanical check, you came out. 40 minutes max. The building was basically empty. There were maybe 3 or 4 rooms that had any active equipment at all, and room 19 was one of them. The first time the voice came through my radio, I thought it was bleed from another channel. That happens sometimes on site. The frequencies aren't perfectly separated. You get crosstalk. I was in the hallway outside the storage closet on the east end checking a junction box, and my radio clicked. Static, then a word. Just one. Hello? I turned the volume all the way down. Finished the junction box. Kept going. The second time I was near the service door on the north side of Annex C, the one that opens to a little concrete pad between buildings. I'd propped it open with my cart to run a mop line through. The speaker above the door, the one in the hallway mounted up near the ceiling, turned on with a soft click. No music, no dispatch, just open air. Then a voice, thin and tired, said my name. Derek. That part bugged me a little. I didn't answer. I pulled the cart through and let the service door swing shut. I finished the hallway and moved on to the next section of my route, but I thought about it for the rest of the night, not in a spiral, just in the background. The way you think about something you can't quite explain. My name. Not hey or hello. My name. The rules didn't say anything about that. By the 5th night back, it was getting more specific. I was doing the mechanical check in room 19. Quick sweep, check the panel, count the lights, get out. And the speaker in the corner, the small one mounted near the door, turned on mid-count. The voice said it had been a long coast, said the air recyclers were running low, said it could hear me breathing. I kept counting. 31, 32, 33. The lights were orange-green, the same as always, small and dense across the panel. 34. I wrote it on my log sheet, locked the door behind me, and walked out. I didn't sleep well that week. Not scared exactly. More like I had a thing in the back of my head that wouldn't settle. The kind of tired that's not really about sleep. The night I hit Rule 5 was a Thursday. I remember because I'd gotten a text from John about registration fees and I'd been doing the math in my head most of the shift. Annex C was near the end of my route. I badged in, ran through the mechanical check on the east end, came around to room 19 at about 2 a.m. The door was unlocked, same as always. I pushed it open and started counting. The status panel had more lights than usual. I noticed it right away. There was just more glow. I counted slow, didn't rush it. Got to 34 and kept going. 35, 36, 2 extra, maybe 3, depending on how I counted the cluster on the bottom left. Rule 5, more than 34 lights, lock the exterior door and leave. I closed room 19, walked to the exterior door on the west end of the building, the big steel one with the crash bar, and I locked it from the inside with the deadbolt. Pushed out through the secondary exit on the east end and let that one close behind me. Walked back to the main maintenance building, wrote it on my log. Annex C exterior locked per protocol. Went back to the rest of my route. That was it. Didn't think about it too hard. Rule said lock it. I locked it. Monica called me into her office 2 days later. She had her clipboard, which she always had, and she was sitting very straight in her chair. The office was small. Just a desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard with route assignments on it, and a window that looked out at the parking lot. I sat down. She looked at her clipboard for a second, and then at me. Security flagged Annex C, she said. The exterior door was locked from the inside. Yeah, I said. I did that. She waited. Rule 5, I said. I counted more than 34 lights in room 19. The rule says lock the exterior door and leave, so I locked it. Monica went still. Not the regular kind of still where someone is thinking. The other kind. The kind where a person is working very hard not to show something. You counted more than 34, she said. 36, I think. Maybe 37. She put the clipboard face down on the desk. I'd never seen her do that before. You weren't supposed to reach Rule 5, she said. She said it flat, no inflection, like she was reading from something. I looked at her. What does that mean? She took a second. The rules aren't just safety steps. Each one corresponds to a level, a stage. She stopped. Rule 1 is baseline containment. Rule 2 is first escalation. Rule 3, second. Rule 4, third. She paused again. Rule 5 means the situation inside that building has moved past everything the previous 4 rules were managing. I sat with that for a second. When Adam went in, I said, Where was it? She looked at the window. Rule 2. So it had gone from Rule 2 to Rule 5 in the time since Adam, in the time I'd been running the route, and she had handed me that laminated list knowing exactly what each rule measured, knowing that if I got to 5, it meant the building had moved 3 stages past, where it was when the last guy ended up on a stretcher. I didn't say that out loud. I just thought it. What happens past Rule 5? I said. She didn't answer that. She picked up her clipboard again, looked at the route sheet like she was checking something. Her jaw was tight. I could see it from where I was sitting. I need to make some calls, she said. Stay available. I stood up. She didn't look at me when I walked out. I went to the break room and got a cup of coffee from the machine, stood at the counter and drank it. The coffee was terrible, same as always, burnt and thin. Through the window I could see the antenna dishes out on the flats, the big ones, white against the pre-dawn sky. They were still turning, slow and steady, tracking whatever they were tracking. I thought about the laminated list sitting in my jacket pocket. I thought about the photograph, the sharp eyes, the flight test coveralls, the badge too small to read. Dead since '93. I drank the coffee, went back to my cart. The bad decision didn't feel like a bad decision at the time. That's the thing about bad decisions. They feel like information gathering. I had 3 more hours on shift. I'd already done my rounds. The annex route was finished. Room 19 at 1:45, lights counted, logged, moved on. I was supposed to be cleaning the East Wing bathrooms. I wasn't cleaning the East Wing bathrooms. I was sitting in my truck in the lot thinking about Adam's eyes, the way they tracked the ceiling. And I was thinking about what Monica said, that I was never supposed to reach Rule 5, that the rules weren't warnings, that they were a map of how far the problem had progressed. I wanted to know what the problem was. I know. But I'd followed those rules for 4 nights, and I still didn't understand what I was protecting, or what I was protecting it from. And Adam was in a hospital bed staring at nothing, and nobody would tell me anything useful. I figured if I went in during the window, just went in, stayed near the door, kept my hands in my pockets and my mouth shut, I'd see what Adam saw, and then I'd know. That was my logic. It's not great logic. I checked my watch. 2:11. 5 minutes before the window opened, I got out of my truck. The hallway in Annex C felt different at that hour. The air pressure was wrong, like when a building has bad HVAC and one corridor runs warmer than it should. Not dramatic, just off. The fluorescents were doing their usual 60-cycle hum, and my steel-toed boots on the old linoleum were louder than they had any reason to be. I'd forgotten how quiet the building got after 2. I didn't go into room 19. I stood in the hallway outside it, close to the door. I could see the status panel through the small wired glass window. The lights were in normal range. I counted from the angle I had. 31, maybe. Hard to tell exactly. I kept my hands in my jacket pockets, kept my mouth closed, breathed through my nose. 2:16 came. The ceiling speaker crackled, not loud. Just the same thin static, that dry pop like a bad solder joint warming up. Then the voice. "Your boots," it said. I didn't move. Black steel-toed, scuffed on the right toe cap, I can see you standing there. I looked up at the speaker, old intercom unit, surface-mounted, beige plastic going yellow at the edges. Looked like it had been there since the '80s. I looked back at the floor. "You're breathing shallow," the voice said. Lincoln Bridges, tired and calm and patient, same as every other night. "You're trying not to make noise. That's smart. But I can hear your heartbeat through the antenna array. You've been on site long enough that I know your rate." That part bugged me. Not because it was impossible. I figured it was probably not literally true, but because it was specific enough that I couldn't dismiss it the way I wanted to. I stood there and made myself not react. "You want to know about your colleague?" the voice said. I kept my mouth shut. "The one they took out on a stretcher. You've been trying to understand it since you took his route." A pause. The static shifted, like a carrier wave adjusting frequency. He answered. That's all. He was in this hallway, and I asked him to confirm receipt of my transmission, and he said yes. He keyed his handset and said yes. Another pause. One word. I was looking at the status panel through the window. The lights were climbing. He can't stop looking up because he answered, because he opened a channel. There's a protocol. When a crew module establishes contact, it has to be maintained. He opened the line and I'm maintaining it. That's not cruelty. That's procedure. 34 lights. I counted them again. 34. Then 35. I stepped back from the door. 36. 37. The speaker was still going, something about trajectory and a life support timer, but I'd stopped processing the words. I was watching the panel. 38 lights, all of them burning steady, and then the whole panel brightened, voltage bumping up, all 38 going from amber to something closer to white. I turned around and walked fast toward the exterior door. Not running. I told myself I wasn't running. I hit the push bar and it didn't move. I hit it again, harder. Nothing. The bar pushed down fine, but the latch didn't release. I could feel the mechanism clunking inside the door, something catching, not turning over. I shoved my shoulder into it. The door was solid, old steel frame, and it wasn't moving. Behind me, the speaker was still going. I dug into my jacket pocket for my key ring. I had about 12 keys on it, which is too many, and my hands were not completely steady. The exterior key for Annex C was brass, older than everything else on the ring. The kind of key that looks like it came from a hardware store and got cut from a blank that was already worn. I got it into the lock and turned it, and the cylinder moved maybe a quarter turn and stopped. Caught on something. I turned it back, tried again. Same thing. The speaker said my name, not Derek. My full name. I don't know how it had that. I didn't think about it then. I just turned the key again, harder, felt the brass flex, and then something in the cylinder gave way with a grinding pop, and the door swung open into cold desert air, and I was outside. I stood there for a second, just breathing. The flats were dark. The dishes were out there, the big ones turning slow. No wind. Smell of dust and creosote and something faintly electrical from the building behind me. I shoved the key back into the exterior lock out of habit, and it went in, crooked and stuck. The mechanism was shot. The key was bent. I could feel it. I left it in the lock and walked to the main control building. Monica was already in the contractor office when I got there, which meant she'd been waiting, which meant she knew the window had been active. She was standing against the far wall with her clipboard, and she looked at me the way you look at someone who just confirmed something you already suspected. There was a man I didn't recognize sitting at the table. Big guy. Close-cropped gray hair, navy polo tucked into tactical pants, a sidearm holster on his hip, and a government ID on a lanyard. He had the kind of face that's been outside in difficult weather for a long time and stopped caring about it. He didn't stand up when I came in. "Sit down," he said. I sat down. Martin McCormick, NASA Security. He said it the way people say things they've said 10,000 times. "You went into Annex C during the restricted window." "I did," I said. He looked at Monica. She looked at her clipboard. McCormick put a binder on the table. Black cover, 3 inches thick. Red diagonal stripe across the front. The label read, Echo Fence, Annex C Containment in block letters with a classification marking above it that I didn't recognize. He opened it to a tabbed section near the front and turned it to face me. "Read the summary page," he said. I read it. Took me a few minutes. The language was technical in places, the kind of federal bureaucratic technical where they use 10 words where 2 would do, but the core of it was simple enough. In 1991, a team at Goldstone ran an experiment bouncing a deep space carrier signal off an uncharted object, identified only as Target 7, located somewhere past Mars. A ranging test, mostly. They wanted to see how the signal degraded over distance and whether the return was clean enough to carry data. The return signal was clean. It was also carrying something extra, a voice pattern, recorded and analyzed against every known NASA and contractor audio file from the period. Matched at 91% confidence to a Lincoln Bridges. Flight engineer. Test program. Voice samples collected during communications checks in 1990 and 91. Bridges had died in a hangar fire in Mojave in 93, 2 years after the experiment, 2 years after the signal left. "The math on that doesn't work," I said. "No," McCormick said. "It doesn't." He let that sit there. I kept reading. NASA had built Annex C as a sink. A dedicated receive point to pull the signal off the main networks and keep it isolated. The antenna array in the building was rigged to capture the carrier wave and route it into a closed loop, so it wasn't contaminating dish operations or bleeding into anything connected. They'd needed someone inside the building during the active window to monitor containment and follow a specific response protocol. Someone with facility access who could move through the building without attracting attention. Custodians, maintenance contractors, nobody watches the guy cleaning the floors. You trained maintenance workers for this, I said. We provided a protocol, McCormick said. Your predecessor followed it for 6 years without incident. My predecessor isn't Adam, I said. Adam had the route for 8 months. McCormick nodded like that was a data point and not a problem. Your colleague, Mr. Park, transmitted on his handset during the active window on his 4th night on the route. One word, confirmation of receipt. He closed the binder. The signal treats a response as contact established. Once contact is established, it maintains the link. He looked at me directly for the first time. The voice isn't looking for conversation. It's looking for someone to answer. That's the entire mechanism. Someone answers, the containment degrades. The signal starts finding other pathways. Adam answered, and now it's getting out, I said. Containment is failing, he said. Yes. Monica still hadn't said anything. She was against the wall, clipboard pressed to her chest, jaw doing the tight thing I'd been seeing for days. I looked at the binder, then at McCormick, then at the clock on the wall, which read 4:52 in the morning. What happens when it fully gets out? I said. McCormick looked at Monica. Monica looked at the floor. That was basically my answer. McCormick let the quiet sit for a second. Then he opened the binder to a page near the back and turned it toward me. A diagram. Hand-drawn. Looked old. Room 19 from above. A box with labeled sections. One wall had a dotted rectangle marked Status Panel. Behind it a note in small print. Manual shunt. Lever. Do not engage unless directed. Behind the status panel, McCormick said, there's a secondary relay housing. Inside that housing is a manual shunt. If someone trips it during the active window, it dumps the signal load into a ground loop and terminates the link. Permanently. He tapped the dotted rectangle. Physical. No electronics involved, no transmission, no voice. Someone just has to pull a lever, I said. Without speaking, without looking at the clock, without triggering any device. One item after another. During the window. 2:16 to 2:25. I looked at him. So, go do it. He didn't flinch. My access level doesn't permit entry during an active event. That's a hard restriction on my credentials. Not something I can override. I looked at Monica. She'd put her clipboard down, which was the first time I'd seen that in days. Her hands weren't totally still. Monica, I said. She didn't look up. That was it. Neither of them was going in, and I was standing there in a Navy contractor polo with a site badge clipped to my chest that said, Facilities Technician. And apparently that made me close enough to expendable that nobody felt the need to say it out loud. McCormick had the look of a man waiting for a conclusion to arrive. Monica was studying the floor. I thought about Adam, the stretcher, his eyes going. You want me to go back in, I said. During the window. Pull a lever. Don't speak. Don't look at the clock. Yes. And that ends it. Terminates the active signal link. Yes. I stood there with the binder in my hands. I'd been doing this job for 8 years. I knew how to fix an air handler, how to swap a ballast, how to navigate a building in the dark by feel. None of that was relevant here, and I knew it. What was relevant was that I was the one who'd walked out of Annex C twice already, and I was the only one in the room who had a shot at walking out a 3rd time. And McCormick knew it, and Monica knew it, and now I knew it too. Give me the binder, I said. He handed it over without asking why. I walked to the door. Derek, Monica said. I stopped. She opened her mouth and then didn't say anything. I don't know what she was going to say. I don't think she knew either. I nodded once and walked out. It was 2:14 when I got back to the Annex C exterior door. I had the binder open in front of my face, not reading it, just holding it up, keeping it between my eyes and whatever I'd look at if I wasn't careful. I'd left my radio on the hood of my truck, left my phone in the glove box. I had a flathead screwdriver in my back pocket because I'd grabbed it from my kit on the way out without totally deciding to, and the brass key on my belt loop, because the last time I'd needed to force that lock, having something solid in my hand had mattered. The door was unlocked. McCormick's crew had reset it. I pushed through. The hallway smelled the same. Cold metal and, somewhere underneath it, old paper. The lights were on, but the space was too tall and too wide, and it always felt dim regardless. My boots were loud on the tile, so I slowed down and let them get quieter. I kept the binder up. The hallway speaker crackled. I stopped. I'm proud of you, it said. Lincoln Bridges. That thin, tired voice. It said it with real weight. Not a greeting. Just a fact. That was the part that got to me. Not the words, the tone. I kept walking. The analog clock was at the end of the hall, sitting in my peripheral, and I kept it there, peripheral. I got past it. I kept moving. Room 19 was the second door on the left. Cold handle. I pushed it open with my shoulder and went in. The status panel ran the east wall, floor to near ceiling. Rows and columns of indicator lights, green and amber. I swept the bottom third with my eyes and counted slow. 38. 4 over the threshold. I noted it and moved toward the panel. I didn't look at the clock. The corner speaker crackled. It had been quiet when I came in. It wasn't anymore. You've been thinking about your son, it said. John, spring semester registration is coming up soon. I crouched at the base of the panel and ran my free hand along the bottom edge, feeling for the seam from the diagram. He wouldn't have to worry about tuition, the voice said. Not any of it. You open the bay, Derek, that's all. Just open the bay and none of it matters anymore. John gets everything. I found the seam, a thin gap where the panel housing met the wall mounting. He thinks you're just a janitor, the voice said. He doesn't know what you do out here. That one landed, I'll admit that. But here's the thing. John doesn't think I'm a janitor. He looked up my job title once when he was about 17. Facilities technician. He found the median salary range, which I already knew, and then told me he thought it was cool that I understood how buildings actually worked. The systems, he said. He actually used that word. That's the kid. So I didn't open the bay. I got the screwdriver out and drove it into the seam. The housing was mounted tight, heavy hardware, serious installation. I levered the screwdriver and my knuckles caught the edge of the casing. Left hand first, then right when I shifted grip. The skin went on both, that sharp sting, and then warmth right after. I kept going. The seam widened a little, then more. The wired glass window on the north wall bowed outward, just a little. Just enough to notice. I didn't look directly at it. The panel swung open. Inside, a metal housing, open-backed. Relay block, heavy cables, and clipped to a center post with a red plastic tag. A lever. The tag said, manual shunt in black stencil. The lever was pointed up. My hands were bleeding a little. I wiped them on my pants. I grabbed the lever and pulled. Every status light on the panel went white at the same time. Not one after another. All of them, together, instant. The kind of white that doesn't feel like a color. It feels like a sound. I stepped back, and my shoulder hit the wall behind me. The speaker did something I don't have a clean word for. It was feedback at first. That high-pitched squeal you get when a mic gets too close to a monitor. But it kept climbing past that. Past the point where feedback stops and something else starts. The sound had edges to it. Like something tearing that shouldn't be able to tear. I had both hands over my ears and I could still feel it in my back teeth. Then the hallway lights cut out. Total dark. Not dim, total. And for about 1 second, maybe less, the floor wasn't where it was supposed to be. That's the only way I can say it. Not like I fell. Not like anything moved. More like the geometry of the room changed and my feet didn't get the message fast enough. My stomach went the way it goes on an elevator when the cable drops too fast. I grabbed the doorframe and it was solid and I held on to it until the second was over. The pressure came back first. I felt it in my ears, a pop-like altitude change, and then the floor was just the floor again. Concrete, real, my boots on it. The speaker cut off mid-scream. Just nothing. Silence so sudden it almost had a sound of its own. I looked at the analog clock above the north door. I wasn't supposed to, but it was dark and I wasn't thinking straight. The second hand had stopped. The minute hand was on 16. I looked away. I don't know how long I stood there in the dark. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Long enough for my eyes to find the red exit sign at the end of the hallway. Long enough to remember I had legs. I walked out. I didn't run, which I'm a little proud of. I walked, fast, but I walked. The exterior door took 4 tries with the broken key. The mechanism was wrecked from earlier, and I jammed it worse on the way in. I worked the key in at an angle, the way you do with a lock that's almost gone, just trying to catch something in there, anything, until I felt it bite. I turned it slow, and it held. I pushed the door open, stepped out into the desert night, and stood there breathing. The air smelled like sand and nothing else. I walked to the main control building. I didn't look back. Martin was already there when I got to the contractor office. Monica, too, sitting at the table with a paper cup she wasn't drinking from. I sat down and put my hands flat on the table because they were still bleeding a little, and I didn't want to make it worse. Martin looked at my knuckles, and then at my face, and asked if I'd spoken inside. I said no. He nodded once and wrote something down. I asked about the clock stopping, and he said that was expected. I asked what happened to the signal, and he said the shunt should have redirected it into a grounding array under the slab. Should have. He used that word twice. I noticed but didn't say anything. Monica didn't speak the whole time. She had her arms crossed and her eyes on the table, and she looked like someone who'd been awake for about 40 hours straight. She probably had been. Martin told me a crew would come at first light to address the door. I asked what that meant. He said it meant the door was getting addressed. That was the whole answer. I drove home and sat in the parking lot of my apartment building for a while. Not doing anything, just sitting. I had a half-eaten bag of trail mix in the cup holder from 2 days ago, and I ate some of it. Then I went inside and slept for 9 hours, which was a record for me. At dawn, Martin had 4 guys out there with a welder. I heard about it secondhand from a guy on the electrical crew who saw it from across the lot. They welded the exterior door frame, not the lock, the whole frame, tack welds around the edges. Then they bolted a yellow electrical hazard sign to the door with 4 screws, the kind of sign that's supposed to make you walk the other direction without asking questions. It worked. Nobody asked questions. Or if they did, they didn't ask them out loud. Adam Park was in the hospital for 6 weeks. Meadow told me that part. She said they had him sedated most of the time because when he wasn't sedated, he wouldn't stop tracking the ceiling with his eyes. Couldn't help it, apparently. Some reflex that wouldn't shut off. She said it like she was reading from a report. Very flat, very clinical. I think that's how she got through her shifts. I sent him a card, one of those generic ones from the pharmacy. Blue with a stripe says, "Get well soon," in blocky letters. I'm not great at cards. I wrote, "Hang in there, man," and signed my name. I don't know if he ever read it. I hope he did. I hope it meant something. Probably it just sat on a nightstand while he tracked whatever he was tracking on the ceiling. He got out eventually. I heard he moved back to Fresno, where his sister lives. I hope that part's true. I put in for the day shift transfer the same week. Monica signed off on it without comment. I don't think she wanted to look at me any more than I wanted to be in that building at 2 a.m. Days were different. More people around, more noise. Guys eating lunch in the break room, engineers walking through with coffee. The dishes looked different in daylight. Bigger somehow. You could see the full scale of them when the sun was up. During nights they were just shapes. During the day they were actually enormous. I'd look at them sometimes between rounds and think about all the signals coming and going through them, all the data, all the distance, and I'd think, most of it is probably fine. Most of it. John came by once on a Saturday when I was finishing a shift. He wanted to see the facility. I took him through the main visitor route, nothing classified, just the lobby displays and the overlook where you could see the big dish. He took a photo of it on his phone. He said it was surreal. I said yeah. He asked if I ever got used to it. I told him mostly. I didn't take him near Annex C. It wasn't on the visitor route anyway. A month after all of it, I came in one morning and Monica's office was open. She was standing at her desk putting files into a cardboard box. Not the kind of packing you do when you're moving offices. The other kind. I stopped in the doorway and she looked up. She said NASA had ended the maintenance contract. Company-wide, not just her. Something about budget restructuring, which is what they say when they don't want to say what actually happened. She said it like she'd already processed it. Calm, organized, all her pens lined up at the top of the box. I said I was sorry. She said she'd land somewhere. Then she went back to packing. I kept my shift. The new contract company kept most of the crew on. Different badges, same buildings. Different polo color, actually. Gray instead of navy. That was the main change I noticed. I still see the Goldstone dishes sometimes when I drive out on the 15 toward Barstow. You can see them from the highway if the angle is right. These massive white bowls tilted toward the sky, turning slow. They're always moving a little, repositioning, following something. They don't stop for weather or budget restructuring or welded doors. They just keep going. I don't know what they're picking up most of the time. That's not my department. My department is the floors and the air handlers and the ballast replacements and making sure the bathrooms stay functional. That's the job. I'm good at the job. But at 2:16 in the morning, every morning wherever I am, I make sure I'm somewhere else, in my apartment, in my truck, at a 24-hour diner on Main Street in Barstow that only plays 80s rock and has coffee that tastes like it's been on the burner since 1987. I don't care where. Anywhere with walls that aren't Annex C and a ceiling I don't have to think about. That's the whole thing. That's what happened. John passed his spring semester. Straight B's, 1A in his computer class. He called to tell me, and I sat in my truck in the facility parking lot and listened to him talk about it for 20 minutes. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. That was enough.